Hello and welcome back to Chennai Queer Lit Fest 2020 Live. And this is the second session of the day. And we have Yarini Dream, who talk about the art of storytelling in this session. And to introduce Yarini Dream, so Yarini is a touring and performing artist, organizer, cultural worker and consultant with over 20 years experience using artistic tools for healing, organizing, and dignity with communities contending with violence and trauma. Yarini tours as part of hip hop storytelling, Dear Brooklyn Dreamwolf, and is a consultant through Vision Change Win. Yarini is also currently coordinating a Tamil-led response to recent attacks on asylum, including the June 25th Supreme Court of the United States ruling against a Tamil asylum seeker. Welcome, Yarini.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Vanakkam. So we are so glad to have you here at the Chennai Queer Lit Fest this year.
Vanakkam, Mauli. Nandi.
Vanakkam. Nandri. So, Yarini, to start with, you are a performing artist. You are a person who wear multiple hats, and you've been working with the communities for a long time. And so, just I want to ask you, like, what storytelling is for you?
Well, I understand my work as a cultural worker. And I do think that storytelling is at the heart of what I do as a cultural worker. There's a Black feminist, cultural worker, artist, scholar named Bernice Johnson Reagan. And she defines a cultural worker as someone who takes the wisdoms of the past, transforms, and transmits those wisdoms to people in the present time in order to prepare people for the future. And ideally, a more liberatory future. And so I understand my role as a storyteller in that sense. And in many cultures in the ancient days, this was a sacred role. And it was a role that had many elements to it. It had a healing aspect to it. It was also understanding the healing modalities from the past and passing that on to the future. This role helped resolve problems in communities, helped defend the community, brought the community together towards mutual understanding, helped the community make decisions for itself. And so in that way, I see the role of the storyteller as all of these different parts. A role for it is the storyteller artist. The storyteller channels the storyteller channels the wisdoms of the universe, of the past. The storyteller helps bring the community together, and the storyteller helps solve problems in community as well. So those are all the ways in which I see myself as a storyteller.
Great. So, so you said about telling the stories of the past to the present community for a better future, and sometimes the whole aspect of the Queer Lit Fest that we are having, and I think a lot of folks who are working in the area of community storytelling or activism, if I can say, is about bringing in knowledge and also for a better future. And there are many communities, especially marginalized or oppressed communities, where the histories, the past, has always been erased in various ways, right, by the dominant culture or the oppressors. And so it becomes a double, it becomes a burden also for storytellers from the marginalized communities, because we have to keep looking for like what happened even 10 years back, what happened even 20 years back. And this comes from my personal experience growing up as a gay man in India is that when I grew up, I did not have any reference for me like what it means to be gay in India, and especially what it means to be a Tamil gay man in India. And so I started looking at positive representations. And even today, when I talk to my friends or family, it's about I don't know how a gay man has to live when he's 50 years old in India, right? And so it becomes a very difficult conversation sometimes where we have to, go search for the past, if there has been anyone, and also create our own narratives, because we also somewhere want the future generation to look us as a reference point. And how do you see it from your perspective? Like, so how easy, how difficult has that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I see it. I mean, it's the stories of the past, but also the stories of the present as well, right? That have also need to be amplified, transmitted. For me, I see it as spiritual self-defense. It's a necessity, and for myself, it was about creating enough space for my existence as well. Our society, during the times when I was also owning my desires and owning who I was in this world, 20 years ago, it was a very hostile, homophobic environment, and it still is for so many people, transphobic and homophobic and sexist, and very many of our peoples are in very narrow spaces. And there was also this dynamic setup that either you're Tamil and you're straight, and especially if you're raised as a girl, you obey, you're obedient, or you are you're outside of the culture. You're not really Tamil. Right. And so we were given this message that our existence is not even worth anything, that I'm bringing shame upon the family, that I'm betraying my family, the culture, that I'm destabilizing everything, and there's all these negative messages that I'm a horrible person for stepping outside of what I'm expected and what I am told to do. And so it's very damaging, it's very harmful. And storytelling gave me a space in society, and it also gave my heart space to breathe, to heal, to love myself. So I think also, as someone who was raised as a Tamil girl, even in my own Tamil, in the Tamil that I speak, there's a care in it. There's a love in it. I was taught to, I always say, Kusini Tamil, Tamil theriyada. Ana ninga kopi venuma, tetani venuma, suama, nithira kolungo, paravaila, Narakari virupama, auntie mutton roll virupama. So, I needed to learn how to say that to myself. Yana ni eppadi irukkinga? Yana ni neengal soma? Neengal enna theve? Asa enna? I was so used to not paying attention to that and doing it for others. And I had to learn to listen to myself and to be able to own my story, to share that story. And when I did, it shifted my relationships with others. Because when others started to hear my story and understand my perspective, they were like, they could suddenly, that binary of either you're Tamil or you're not, it got broken. This binary that said you obey or you're worthless, it got broken. suddenly people were able to say, no, there's something valuable about this person. There's something I can understand about this person. They're not this foreign, oh, Vityasam Tan, and the Vityasam Vadiva. There's a beauty and there's a love. Ambedkar, in that
Right.
that people could understand. And so I see storytelling as a form of spiritual self-defense.
Beautifully put. Romba அழகா சொன்னீங்க நீங்க. So because when we spoke about about the Lit First few weeks back, and so there was something I said about how you go about storytelling, and then you said I didn't have a choice, and and suddenly from that day it has been on my mind. I didn't realize for a long time a lot of queer persons, especially with multiple identities, and where we don't have a choice. The only way for us to express ourselves is how we are and who we are. And I think as a person with, not just multiple hats, but with multiple layered identities, I think something which you said in your previously is that, listening to yourself and, where people identify or relate to your stories. So I'm going to just narrate an incident which happened 7 years ago in 2013 in Chennai, where you performed at one of the Pride events. And I think that was the first time I saw you perform in person in India. And so there were two performances that you did. One was called The Story of a Butterfly and Firefly. And there was this another performance called The Marriage. And this specifically, I remember I also wrote about it was because the event happened in the Besant Nagar beach, where anyone can walk into the performance, and this seemingly straight couple walked into the performance. And during your performance, there is this one of your characters, the lesbian character, says this line: "I thought one of the benefits of being a dyke was that you don't have to get married." And the straight woman who's married, she jumped with joy and clapped. And she realized no one else clapped that because we all were. And that, relatability, I think that was amazing for me, that relatability. And that's something I think, like, how do you bring that, or else, like, so do you feel that this relatability where people have, when they sometimes we look ourselves in the performer, and in this case it's you, and sometimes do you feel the pressure that I have to be this perfect person when I tell my stories, or do you think like I have to break the stereotypes, I have to break the expectations, because that's what you said earlier, I don't have to be the perfect mold of the expectations that is had of you. How do you go about it, and how do you spread that message, especially for younger persons?
Well, I think as far as artistically in a skill, specificity is very important in strong storytelling, and then truth. On a spiritual level, I think as honest as we can be, and honesty and truth has nuance. And honesty and truth is both hilarious, and it is also is heartbreaking. And I think what we're dealing with with these stereotypes is it lacks that nuance. Now, economically, we see systems that are set up that want to amplify the stereotype. It's easy, it's marketable, and so sometimes what we see in more visible dominant media are stereotypes. And unfortunately, many of our queer performers have to engage in that. And sometimes, definitely within Hollywood and the dominant film and TV industry in the US, still the only space for queer people, for South Asian people, for darker skinned people, sometimes is comedy or very specific types of entertainment, dance, or, you know, we're seeing some just now, you know, Pose and some other TV shows that are breaking through and actually telling the stories of trans and queer lives in a more complicated, nuanced, truthful, and honest way. But we are contending with multiple forces, and it takes a lot of work to be able to get that work sometimes distributed. But as far as skills, because for myself, you know, there's different measures of success. And I was interested in, first, let me tell my truth and my own story. Then, of course, I'm going to evolve it. I'm going to mold it. But I'm touring. I'm going through so many different places, so many different audiences. And when I'm with Tamil audiences, sometimes it's the first time, especially when I was younger, especially 20 years ago, I might have been the first queer person that audience had interacted with. So if I wanted to keep performing, there needed to be people needed to be engaged. There needed to be a way in which people were moved. And my measure of success was their heart open? And almost after every performance, I have a discussion because I want to understand and hear and experience. I want others to experience a transformation, to connect the dots, to open their heart, and then for their heart and mind to align, for them to have a physical experience. And that's what I think changes society. That is the cultural work of shifting culture. Is that we actually, if we only engage people intellectually, sometimes their behavior won't change. We need to engage both their hearts and their minds, and that automatic physical reaction to seeing somebody different and making a face, seeing somebody different and recoiling, seeing somebody different and their heart beating fast because they think that they're dangerous, or clutching their purse, or getting a feeling of disgust. That's a physical reaction that happens within seconds. That's what that's what I'm seeking as a cultural worker to transform. And so there are different layers of skill that we develop as storytellers. I definitely have a very specific goal. You know, on a spiritual level, I want to align humanity with the divine. On a political level, I want to shift culture towards a more liberatory, just, fair place. And storytelling is one of in which to do it. So it's circles within circles within circles. First, it's the inner work within myself. What is my truth? What story is it that I have to tell? And I think by going deeply in, we also connect to the divine. So within ourselves, we also then connect to our ancestors, to the divine forces that also can transmit in that intimate moment. What is the story that will emerge from us? What is it that we know without knowing? Then it's about, when we share, the relationships. How does this shift our relationships to each other? And then on a coordinated level and a strategic level, how does that shift society?
Great. So you said about you being sometimes being the first queer person where South Asians, especially Tamil persons, audiences interact with or see performing, and I think I have also noticed a lot of folks, while they may have queer persons in their families and friends, they may not be aware of it, and when they come across an out person in the work or in the performance spaces or in their recreational spaces, people have very different very different reactions. And as a performer, like especially 20 years back, how was it for you when people recognize you as a queer person and a performer? Like how did you deal with it, or how did you, bring people to your side?
Yeah. Um, I I feel very blessed. Interestingly enough, many people, especially that peace wedding, I'm aware of what pieces people are openers, right? When it's a new audience, or an audience that's newer to certain ideas, what pieces open space. Going back to that story of the woman who stood up and clapped, right? When I joined feminist and queer liberation movements, trans and queer liberation movements, we were actually for the abolition of marriage, and feminists were too, and especially South Asian and Tamil feminists. We're for the abolition of dowry. We're for the abolition. It was all intertwined. The abolition of caste, the annihilation of caste, the abolition of marriage. We understood these as repressive systems. And then when the gay marriage movement started, I actually think there was a break from radical feminism and trans and queer liberation, because it became a movement that assimilated to the marriage system instead of fundamentally changing it. And now there's that Netflix show, I've forgotten the name of it, that matchmaking show, Indian matchmaking show.
Yeah.
I'm so shocked when I watched it, because I was like, these are women who consider themselves empowered. And are we at a point now where we're trying to get the inclusion of arranged marriage? And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to erase the complexities of the ways in which marriage and love and different relationships form. I'm not saying that yes, we know that there are arranged marriages that are loving and healthy, and that I'm not saying arranged marriage is better than love marriage. I'm saying all marriage it should be something that we question. Why do we have a system that says this relationship is granted certain protections, but an auntie and a nibbling don't have that? Two best friends don't have that. So any people or four best friends, like anyone who is taking care of each other, loving each other, who are interdependent, sharing finances, sharing food, that should be a relationship that should be understood as a familial, close kinship relationship. That person is the closest person in the hospital. That person should be able to have access to that, to someone who they have been in deep interdependent relationship with. And so we lost that along the way. But culturally, there is still, I in Tamil, when I call myself Vityasam, and I found, because that's the way in which I started all my conversations with people. My Tamil is very simple. Chinna pilla pola enakku Tamil theriyum. So when I go to Yarpanam, to Vavanya, when I'm in family spaces, if in Europe or in Canada, that where our family is many different places. When I'm in Tamil Nadu as well, when people start to ask about why I'm not married, especially in my 30s, now I'm officially a spinster, but when I was in my late 20s and 30s, it's consistent. Why aren't you married? 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 And so I had to always contend with that question. And so the sentence would be, I'd always start nan vityasam. Chumma kalyanam tevela. You know, that's how I always started off the conversation. And then sometimes I'd see where I can push it, you know, and I go, palehal vidapum ana purasan tevela, you know. And then I'd see, you know, if I can, I try to push the, you know, boundaries depending on who I was with. Could I trust this person? I would slowly see if it was safe. Then I would tell them, actually, I do have a partner, but that partner is a woman. So Madison, you know, I have a wife, you know, or I have a my snady, you know, friend. She's not just a friend, right? I would slowly kind of open it up. But every one of those conversations started with nan vityasa. And what I found, that was just like the reality of my situation. But then I found that this kind of opened up conversations for other people as well. You know, it was also, you know, sometimes instead of elada for, you know, people in our family or our friends or community who have disabilities, and nan vityasam, you know, and the valka vityasam, you know, or, you know, for women who didn't want to get married, they might have been straight, you know, they were also vityasam. And I think for us in Alange Tamil communities, I was seeing that there's something that was much more expansive about being different, something much more inclusive that united us, that there were many women who could identify with some of the struggles that I was having as a queer person, because ultimately it was also about, as a person raised as a girl, my mobility and the pressures that there are on society. And for so many of our queer folks, you know, there's other pressures. There's economic pressures. You know, if they don't get married, then their family might be economically destitute, right? So their sisters will not be able to get married. They're you know, there's a whole set of problems that have to be addressed in order for someone who is raised as a girl to have a, you know, autonomy and to be able to, you know, what does that mean? Will I be able to live on my own? Will I be able to earn my own money? Will I be able to access a job with dignity? Will I be able to access an education? And so it becomes a much more intersectional and in that way also coalition. And I think many of our queer movements actually did start that way. When we look at Nepal, that was a coalition between Dalit communities, sex workers, and queer people, because all of those issues were impacting everyone. But I think there is a way in which neoliberalism, assimilation functions that actually divides our communities. And there was definitely a break between feminism and trans and queer liberation that happened, or really queer, you know, gay liberation, when through the gay marriage movement. Some of these other issues got dropped, you know.
Yeah, I think we are exactly in that you know, crossroads in India, especially because now Section 377 has been amended. It's been 2 years now, and so the current conversation is around gay marriage, same-sex marriage, and I think we are currently having all these conversations about, because you know, we were at a place where we wanted to dismantle the institution of marriage, and now we are talking about marriage equality. So this contradiction, you know, I think that's something we all go through, I believe. And But somewhere, the examples that we have, especially in the South Asian countries, from the countries that has legalized gay marriage, I think that's an inspiration, especially in the way about to be cautious about not fall into the same trope of leaving behind certain values and and the the politics that we had at that point of time for a specific agenda. I think that has to go hand in hand, and you put that very well. Thank you for that. Especially at this point, I also wanted to ask you, because the queer identity is not one single identity, and it has multiple layers. And you, as a person with who come with multiple identities, as a Tamil person, as a South Asian person, as a queer person, as a and then there is this larger Tamil identity which goes across different countries, and you have the Ilangai Tamil identity. And how do you connect with the audiences? I know, like you said that you tell your stories what you believe you want to, the authentic sense. But as someone who also works with the communities, who direct communities to tell their stories, how do you go about it? And especially, communities have different needs, and sometimes when we work with certain communities, they might be, resistance towards queer identities or queer persons within the communities. And as someone who has this, who cuts across all the, or checks all the boxes, how do you go about it, especially when you don't want to give up your politics?
Yeah. It's there's so many different questions and ways in which I can answer this question. So being Ilangai Tamil, also being queer during the time periods in which I've been in, and working with multiple communities, so working with our own Ilangai Tamil communities, but then also working with other communities and migrant communities, as well as other people of color communities. And so first, with Ilangai Tamil communities, we didn't have, especially during the war, we didn't have the luxury of a lot of space and time. It was an emergency. We were in crisis. We were in war, and there's certain skills and practices that you need in an emergency that I think is something that we should also think about right now as people are starting to battle neo-fascism, authoritarianism, communities that are persecuted and targeted. We have no other choice but to make broad alliances in order to protect our communities. For those who are organizers, for those of us who are trying to make interventions and who are working towards solutions. Now, what sometimes people get lost in broad alliances is that they think that means compromise or negotiation of values and principles. Absolutely, you are always accountable to your community. There's no way I cannot be accountable. I guess there are those who are not accountable to their own community, but that's my priority. My priority is the dignity and the liberation of all Tamil people, and that is non-negotiable to me. The value of every human life is not negotiable to me, and so what a broad alliance means is actually finding others who share a value that I have and also have conviction with that value. So I was able to align with other people who really valued the dignity of every human life and who believed that people's lives should not be threatened or endangered, that people should not be murdered, that they should not be killed. And so I looked for those people who truly cares about people, who is doing all that they can with this conviction to ensure the safety of people. And I would find myself making alliances across political lines. Sometimes I was in alliance with a conservative Catholic priest. Sometimes I was in alliance with, I would find myself where the right and the left met these moments of emergency and crisis. And so I think those taught me certain skills. How do we actually engage in broad alliances? And we needed to be able to do that in order to be able to support, help, defend our peoples in certain circumstances. And people saw that they knew that I was, at the very least, a radical feminist. They knew I was unmarried. They knew that I was unmarried, but not a nun. They knew that I was traveling by myself, all of these different places, that I was from the West, and they also saw that I was willing to take the risk and that I really cared and that I was moving from a place of love and ethics. And they knew that I would also challenge them from a place of ethics. I would hold people accountable to their beliefs. If you say you believe this, then we should do this, to the point where I would be like, is Jesus Christ a Dalit? What do you believe? In on the island we say Panjama. I don't know if you use Panjama in Tamil Nadu, but I would be like, who is Jesus Christ for? Who is most important? What so I would, even if I was able to engage because I was raised Catholic in these kind of conversations with Catholic priests who were much more conservative than me, because I understood their belief systems. I understood in their understanding sometimes of how theology was intersecting with their quote unquote charitability. And so I was able to push that towards a more liberation frame. And same with even leftists. Sometimes we still have different political points of view, but we would align around this value that people should not be dying in this way. It's not right, And so that's how we kind of build broad alliances. Is still being non-negotiable around the values, but finding people who also have a strong conviction to certain values, and then being able to make an intervention in that moment. Now, when I was actually working with communities, building trust is very important. If you are facilitating a space for people to be able to share their own stories. And, one thing about, a lot of the spaces with trans women and youth, people that I entered, especially in the Northern Province and the Eastern Province, I do think respond energetically. There is a language that's spoken beyond words, and there's a way in which people, they observe you, they feel you from the moment that you walk into the room. Spiritually, I always ask for permission to do any work that I do. And I feel very clear that if I'm not supposed to be there, I will be given a sign, and I listen to that. If people are resistant, I never push beyond their boundaries. It's a consensual intimacy. It's a choice. People have to choose whether to share or not. And I think as artists, we have a skill to be able to share the energy, of what is within us, the spirit, the soul of what is within us, to to what is outside of us. And so that kind of energetic or soul connection, I think, opened up space for me. And, I also think it's dance as well, that, so when language fails me, or people also said my smile also helped. But even if my smile or my language fails me, I have a dance that people can understand as well. And for me, the dance is also facilitation between the earth and the sky. And I think our peoples, they recognize that spiritual force and that energy. Energy is very, it's its own language, so even if I'm on the bus and somebody does something inappropriate, all it takes is, a look and a finger, and people know, okay, there's like another energy behind that person. There's a boundary. We won't cross it, right? And so I think we're able to communicate on all these different levels, and that also helps build trust. But also, if there's a no, we accept the no. If there's a boundary, we accept the boundary. Storytelling, we don't want to extract. It can be just as extractive. It can just be as exploitative as anything else. So consent is very important in storytelling. And I always, I try to facilitate people to be able to bring their full selves. So it's not like just telling their tragic story or the worst thing that has happened to them in their life, or only their suffering. If people want to tell that part of their story, if they feel safe to tell that part of their story, we welcome that with care. But people also, what are their desires? What are their hopes? What are their wishes? What do we want to see for our society is also another part of the ways in which we what do you want for your life? And being able to understand people without judging them is a very important part of facilitating space for story. And when you're doing it in community, it's allowing for multiple truths to be in existence and to share space without it being in opposition. Because these fascist authoritarian forces are always taking our truths and putting them into opposition. They're creating a polarization that benefits supremacy. But the reality is that there are multiple truths in our community, and we want the multiple truths to be able to coincide and to be able to come up with solutions for all of these truths. Not one truth is better than the other.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I said one.
Okay, so I was about to ask, today we are at times where, especially there is more awareness about queer persons and, the queer literature, queer art, which has always been there. But today there is a new sense of commercialization, which happens. But, there is also an expectation from the artist or the writer saying like, these kind of stories are acceptable. These are the narratives that sells. And somewhere, there is also livelihood involved with the, queer artist, because now we create our own spaces because that's important for us to tell story. It comes from, from our heart to bring in the change. And then we have to survive. We have to live our lives. And that becomes difficult for a lot of queer persons to maintain the balance, not just queer persons, anyone from the marginalized or oppressed communities, because they have to challenge the dominant narrative. We have to challenge the dominant narrative, and also the spaces that are dominated by the dominant groups expect a certain kind of stories from us. And but then someone who has worked with the community for 10 years and someone who has watched our stories has something for everyone. People can relate to us, and it's not just queer persons who have something to learn from us or to relate with us. And how do you see this balance? Like, how can we bring this balance and say like, hey, like we are challenging your narratives, because like you said, there are diverse narratives, there are multiple narratives, and a certain kind of narratives is not authentic, and again, it's not going to bring in the change that we want. And how do you bring in the balance, and how do you challenge this thing?
Yeah. Thank you. This is very important question, because we don't what is the purpose of our storytelling? Is it for the liberation of our societies, of our communities, for our souls? Is it, or is it to serve neoliberalism? And we have to be very careful about what are the spaces and the stories that supremacy curates. And how are we tokenized into those spaces in order to be able to serve another cultural strategy, which is one of dominance, which is one of exploitation, the one that serves neoliberalism, that's really about just making somebody who is straight sometimes, on the lands that I'm on, to make a white person rich, to make a Brahmin person rich, to make, what, how are the stories being served? So one, for me, I think about, I want to leave stories for the future generations. So I want something that is going to live beyond this moment and this trend. And another way in which I measure my success, I am a performer. So coming out of the theater, a good work of theater is a piece that can be performed over and over and over again. And I have written work that I have been able to perform for 20 years and that has still had resonance. And so I'm like, okay, that means that this piece, Butter and Firefly, for example, which is also one of those opener pieces that really, in spaces that are very narrow, that piece has worked very well. It opens up space for conversation. I'm like, okay, this piece I think will also be relevant 100 years from now. I look at my body of work in that way. What is going to be relevant? Sometimes what is a trend is not always going to be relevant in 100 years. Actually, people will critique it and think that they were just part of the ignorance of that time, right? Instead of the wisdom of that time. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't create powerful work that can last for centuries, that can also get a recognition now, So I don't want us to limit the possibilities for ourselves. But I just want us to keep that in mind. Are we trying to engage with just a momentary trend, or are we trying to have work that lasts beyond our lifetimes? The other thing is that I'm very conscious of what kind of cultural strategy I am participating in. I am participating in a cultural strategy against authoritarianism and fascism. I am in a cultural strategy for the liberation of all people. And so I also evaluate my work within that as well. I think that's very important. I don't know if folks heard that there was a rally in Texas called Howdy Modi, and Trump and Modi were there, and there were all these South Asian American performers who performed at it. So many performers. And because they didn't have understanding of cultural strategy, they were just like, well, it's a job, and we were trying to make it as diverse as possible, and there were Muslims involved in that performance, and there were Christians involved in that performance, and we just wanted to do something good for the kids. They didn't understand cultural strategy. They didn't understand what they were doing was part of manipulating children into a propagandistic support of a fascist, of the consolidation of two authoritarians' power. And so it's very important that we as artists understand what our values are, and then recognize that there are always cultural strategies at work. So the music industry in the United States is a big arm of white supremacy. They only distribute small part of the Black American experience throughout the world. They do not uplift the wide range of Black music that emerges from the African diaspora. And they allow for white performers to be able to sing about by a very wide range of topics, but Black women are put in, only certain music by Black women are allowed to be distributed globally, right? So we have to be aware of how these different industries work with supremacy. And then we have to think about our own work within that. We also must think of entrepreneurship and the financial aspect as a form of self-defense. If we do not think about how we will get paid, how we will feed ourselves and our families, we will lose the ability to be able to open our hearts, be generous with our artistry. Poverty kills. And I think the starving artist trope is actually a luxury of the privileged, of somebody who's, inheriting a home or, has some other form of support or has a partner who is earning money or something like that. If you don't have these other types of support, you don't have the privilege of just, oh, it's okay that I don't make money, or as an artist. No, we have to think about how are we going to make money, right? In a way that does not put us at the mercy of supremacists. So I think what you all are doing by having your own publishing company is very important. We have to actually create alternative economic systems, and we have to collaborate with each other and understand ourselves as part of one ecosystem. So what neoliberalism will do and capitalism will do is it'll take two people who are similar. They'll take two queer Tamil artists and they'll put them in competition with each other. And then they'll tokenize. They'll only pick one, right? Mm-hmm. And when we create our own economic systems, then we become collaborators. Because now we are part of a movement. We recognize that we need both of our communities need all of our stories. They in order for society to change, we need all of our stories. But there has to be some sort of economic support for that. And I think it's very, very important that any arts organizations that form must prioritize the payment of the artist. The artist must be understood as a worker that has worker rights. And there must be a living wage for artists, and their labor must be honored and recognized. And we have to always move towards that. Creating organizations where an arts administrator has a full-time salary, but the artists are getting just like a small amount is a problem. From here on out, if you're an arts organization, a significant amount of your budget must go towards paying the artist. Otherwise, you're just exploiting the artist, and you're part of that same economic system that privileges those who are privileged, who have have inheritance, and you are exploiting those who do not have those privileges and forcing them into horrific situations. I think a lot of artists are very ashamed of some of the experiences they have to endure when they're experiencing poverty or when they're experiencing a lack of money. And so we have to understand that we have to also fight for our rights as artists, and we have to be a part of shifting human economies from extraction, domination, exploitation, violence, war, to economies of creativity, nourishment, interdependence, love. So I do think it's very important. I know everybody's brain works differently, and for some artists to be able to think about the business end or the entrepreneurship end of things is is very intimidating. And we want to learn about it and understand it as a form of self-defense. And so
Right.
even if you are like, I don't understand this contract, try to find somebody in your life who will support you in that way, who can help you think through, like, who will read a contract for you. So many times we'll just sign a contract, because we're like, okay, we just need the job and the money, and we'll just sign it, and we won't think about our rights. We won't think about what it is that they put in there. If you can form your own contract, so that you are the one that presents a contract to someone and they have to sign it instead of the other way around, that's even better. Then you have better control over your art and that you can do once. You can look for support. And I'm really, asking also those who are in other professions to please support your artists. It is a part of shifting humanity. It is a fundamental, vital part of shifting humanity. Storytelling for liberation is something that actually challenges the logic of the fascists, the authoritarianisms of capitalism on a fundamental level. That is why the artist is not supported. It is built into the system for the artist to be exploited so that it does not challenge authoritarianism. Through storytelling, we break the polarized debate and reframe it into a collaborative conversation. When we're in the midst of coordinated disinformation, what they are calling information disorder, facts alone adds fuel to the fire. It actually pushes people even more into these polarized debates. It is the storytelling, the nuance that can bring together people of different perspectives, take them out of this polarized conversation and move us towards a collaborative conversation of what is it that we want society to look like? What is it that we want for the future, for our descendants? What do we want for Tamils 1,000 years from now? That is the conversation that our artists have the potential of bringing forward, but those voices are often silenced because of economic realities, especially the stories of our trans and queer Dalit communities, Panjamar communities, are silenced because of the economic realities that people face. And same with so many people who are persecuted because of their sex. They have no mobility in society because of the economic realities that people are facing. And so that is something that must be addressed. And then for the artists ourselves, we have to learn. I know sometimes it's like, we just want to ignore it. We just want to be able to create our work. But it can become very harmful. We have to understand what we're up against. And we have to understand where we can intervene, how we can earn money. For myself, I actually find my income streams in 4 different fields. I earn as a touring artist. I earn as a somatics practitioner. So in the field of healing and wellness. I earn in organizational consulting. So that's where I bring my skills for problem solving and being able to navigate disagreement. And then I also earn in education as well. And so different periods, I have different income streams. I tried for very many years to write grants, and I found that my work was ahead of the curve. So I was ahead of the funding trends. So I would always get rejected for a grant, and then 10 years later, they would be funding a project similar to what I was interested in. I started doing aerial dance in 2009. At that time, people weren't funding this integration of poetry, theater, aerial. Now they are, So as someone who was kind of ahead of the trend, I actually got rejected from a lot of grants. And I internalized that for a long time. I thought, I'm not good enough. Now that I'm old enough to actually look at the last 25 years, I see, oh no, I was just ahead of the time. So I had to earn my money. And for many years, now I'm able to earn money in all of these different ways. But when I was younger, I was babysitting. I cooked and I exchanged food for aerial dance lessons. I cooked and I exchanged food for my press kit. I cooked and when I got injured, I cooked and I exchanged food for my my massage therapy to help me get my mobility back. And so, you know, these are the realities. Is sometimes we do need to have income streams in order to be able to preserve and the time needed to be able to create our art. As long as you're creating, you are an artist. Do not internalize, you know, these messages of capitalism. If I'm not a star, then my art is not worthy. That's not necessarily true at all. Some of us will only be recognized for our work after we have died. You know, but you have to think about the money. You can't ignore it, or it'll catch up to you and it'll actually destroy your ability to create art. So my suggestion is to think about what other skills you have, what additional income streams can you cultivate if you need to, if the money isn't there for your art. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't. And then for everyone else, we have to fundamentally shift the economic system. And for everyone who's collaborating, coming together, creating spaces to publish, to create, to produce, you are a part of this new economy. And you have to build and connect now with all the other parts of the economy so that we can make this more robust, so that we can take over the dominant economy that is destroying people's lives.
True. That's very powerful, and thank you for saying it, because a lot of young queer artists have this dilemma about the validation from the corporates or the dominant spaces, and then creating art. And I think what you said is true, and thank you for saying that. I could keep having this conversation for long, but we have one comment, one question from a viewer. So here it is. It's from Senthil. How do we face or brave our own stories when we are scared or scared of our past? Should we be honest or use metaphors to communicate?
So with ourselves in our most intimate spaces, we need to be honest with ourselves as part of our own healing and part of our own soul work. We want to listen to ourselves, understand what our bodies are saying. And sometimes we need to forgive ourselves as well, because we are, we need to understand ourselves. We need to love ourselves. That's a very fundamental part of our journeys on a spiritual level. Now, when we write, metaphors are very important. And you don't have to tell your most intimate truths to everyone in the world. That's your choice. That's your consent. So it is what you feel moved and compelled to do. Butter and Firefly, the story I do, which is a love story between a butter and firefly, that's a metaphor. And the metaphor actually served as a form of security and safety for me, because in some spaces that I would go into, my life could be threatened if I was open that I'm queer. And so I had to be very realistic about the fact that if I am open and not discreet, I could get killed. So how else am I going to open this conversation? How else am I going to make sure that every queer person in this audience knows what I'm talking about? Metaphor is extremely important, and imagery is extremely important to storytelling. So yes to both.
Thank you. And yes, thank you very much. And so thank you from our audience too. And it was great having you at this year's Lit Fest, the Queer Lit Fest, and especially such powerful message that you have for all of us. And I'm glad that you shared it with us. And we hope to collaborate with you in future. And thank you again from our team.
Thank you. Many blessings.
Thank you. Nandri.
Nandri. Sandipon.
Sandipam. Thank you all for watching this session with Yalini about the art of storytelling. The upcoming session is at 8:30 p.m. with Kirishant, a discussion with Girish. They'll be discussing about the future of inclusive Tamil literary space. And see you all in 20 minutes. And thank you for joining us again.